William Bradford had always lived a life that many would envy. The pristine suburban house, the shiny luxury cars, and a beautiful wife by his side, Jennifer Bradford. Everything about his life screamed success, the kind of life that everyone in their small town wanted to emulate. He had a lucrative business, a charming demeanor, and a reputation that could open any door. But beneath the surface, darkness lurked. Jennifer, his seemingly perfect wife, was the only one who truly knew the cracks in their flawless facade. She had been married to William for over a decade, but in recent months she'd begun to notice something wasn't right. It started with small things: William spending more time away from home, his increasingly erratic behavior, and the way he would carefully guard his phone. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something felt off. Jennifer loved William dearly, but the seeds of doubt had already been sown. One evening, while he was out for one of his late meetings, Jennifer decided to snoop. She opened his laptop, her heart pounding with anticipation. As she sifted through his files, her eyes landed on something unexpected: documents related to financial transactions that didn't make sense. She scanned the papers, her hands trembling, and what she saw made her stomach churn. Her husband had been running a series of fraudulent transactions, falsifying reports and misappropriating company funds. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. Her mind raced. How could William do this? They had everything: money, power, security. But now, it seemed like he had built it all on lies and deception. She knew she had to confront him, but she wasn't sure how. Her once perfect world was slowly crumbling before her eyes. The next morning, William returned home from yet another late meeting, wearing his usual confident smile. Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, the documents in front of her. She was determined to get answers. As he entered, she didn't say anything at first. The silence between them was suffocating. Finally, she spoke. "William, what is all this?" Her voice was steady, but the shock and hurt in her eyes were impossible to hide. She pushed the papers toward him. William froze. His smile faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure. He had never thought his lies would be uncovered, not by Jennifer. She was supposed to be his rock, his partner in this elaborate game he had been playing. But now, she had seen the truth. "Jennifer, I can explain," he said, his voice low and smooth, as if he could talk his way out of this. But Jennifer was no longer buying his charm. The trust was gone, replaced with the cold, harsh reality of betrayal. "You don't have to explain, William. I've seen enough." Her voice shook with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I never thought you were capable of something like this. How could you lie to me? To us? To everyone?" William tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away, standing up and backing away from the table. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the hurt he had caused, but he couldn't afford to lose her, not now. His empire, the life he had worked so hard to build, was on the brink of crumbling. Jennifer knew too much. She could ruin everything. Panic gripped him, the cold sweat on his brow, the rapid beating of his heart. All of it told him that if Jennifer went to the authorities, everything would fall apart. The consequences of his actions would be severe. He couldn't let that happen. Not now. "Jennifer, please," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "You don't understand. We have everything, don't you see? We can fix this. We can work through this together. Just don't tell anyone." But Jennifer's face was set in stone. Her mind was made up. She couldn't be with someone who had built their life on lies. "No, William. I can't live with this. You've crossed a line, and I don't know how we can come back from this." Her words were like a knife to his heart. He had never been in a situation like this before. His perfect life was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As Jennifer turned to walk away, something in William snapped. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. If she went to the authorities, if she exposed him, his life would be over. He had built everything on lies, and now it was all coming apart. With a flash of panic and desperation, he knew what he had to do. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. Jennifer stood at the doorway, staring at the man she had once trusted with her whole life. William's pleading voice still echoed in her ears, his words like a dull thud against the walls of her mind. "We can fix this," he had said. "We can work through this, together." But she knew deep down there was no way back, not after everything she had uncovered. Yet what came next was not a sense of closure, but an overwhelming sense of confusion. She wanted to believe him, but the man standing in front of her was not the man she thought she knew. He was a stranger, someone who had lied and manipulated his way through their entire marriage. Jennifer didn't know who to trust anymore, not even herself. As William watched her walk out of the room, his heart sank. He was losing control, and that was the one thing he couldn't bear. He had spent years carefully crafting a perfect life, weaving lies and deceit into every corner of his existence. His business, his relationships, his image, all of it had been built on a foundation of dishonesty, and now Jennifer had uncovered it. He couldn't let her leave, couldn't let her walk away with the truth. If she told anyone, if she went to the authorities, everything would come crashing down. The years of deception, the false reports, the fake transactions, it would all be exposed. He couldn't let that happen. Not now. "I'm sorry," William whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, but I have no choice." The lie he had told, the life he had built now felt fragile. But there was still time. There was always time to fix things, he thought, as long as Jennifer didn't expose him. He quickly pulled out his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed a number. "Hey, it's me," he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice was laced with panic. "I need your help. It's getting out of control." On the other end of the line was Mark, an old business associate and someone William had relied on in moments like these. Mark was a fixer, a man who knew how to make problems disappear, even if they involved breaking the law. William had worked with him for years, using Mark's connections and influence to cover up the lies that were beginning to unravel. "Relax, William," Mark's voice was calm, even soothing. "We've been through worse. We'll take care of this. Just stay calm. You need to keep Jennifer quiet. If she tells anyone, it's over." William's stomach churned. He didn't want to hurt Jennifer, but he knew what was at stake. His life, his empire, his future. It all depended on this one moment. "I just need to make sure she doesn't talk. Please, Mark, do whatever it takes." Mark paused for a moment and then chuckled darkly. "You've got a lot to lose, don't you? Don't worry, William. We'll handle it. But you need to do your part. Make her believe it's all a misunderstanding." As William hung up the phone, a cold sweat trickled down his back. He had crossed a line. He knew that. But he had no other choice. The lies were starting to tear everything apart, and now the only option was to cover them up at all costs. He would do whatever it took, even if it meant taking things further than he ever intended. That evening, as Jennifer prepared to leave their home for good, she received a text message. It was from William. He had written, "We need to talk. Please don't leave. I'm begging you. I made a mistake. We can fix this." Jennifer stared at the message, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to believe him, to believe that the man she had married still existed beneath the lies and deceit. But the other part of her, the stronger part, knew that she couldn't ignore what she had uncovered. William's betrayal went beyond financial fraud. It was a betrayal of everything she had trusted him with. The next morning, Jennifer sat in her car outside their house, her mind racing. She wanted to talk to someone, anyone, who could help her make sense of it all. But she didn't want to go to the authorities just yet. She needed to hear it from William. She needed him to admit everything. Maybe then, she could finally move on. But as she stepped out of the car and walked towards the front door, she had no idea what was about to unfold. Inside, William sat in the dark, waiting. The house was eerily quiet. He had no intention of letting Jennifer leave, no intention of letting her go to the police. The lies had worked for so long, and now it was time to finish what he had started. As Jennifer opened the door, he was already there, standing in the hallway, a calm and collected smile on his face. "Jennifer," he said softly, "I'm glad you came back. Let's talk. We can fix everything." But Jennifer wasn't ready to listen. Her mind was made up. She couldn't keep living a lie. The web of lies that William had so carefully constructed was now spinning out of control, and there was no way to stop it. Jennifer stood in the hallway, her hand still resting on the doorknob. William was just a few feet away, his presence as imposing as ever, but something had changed in his demeanor. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a crack in his polished facade. She could see it now, the subtle tremor in his hands, the nervous flicker in his eyes. It was as if he were desperately holding onto a thread that was slipping through his fingers. "Jennifer," William said again, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "I need you to understand. Please." She glanced at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Her instincts told her that something was different this time. He wasn't just pleading. There was a sense of finality to his words, something darker lying beneath them. "I don't know what you think you know, but I swear to you, I'm still the same person," he continued. "I made mistakes. I know that. But it was all to protect us, protect you." The words hit her like a tidal wave. And for a moment, Jennifer felt a deep pang of confusion. Could he still be manipulating her, or was he finally going to admit the truth? The web of lies that had ensnared their lives was finally starting to unravel, but the answers she was seeking still seemed out of reach. "You don't need to protect me anymore," Jennifer said, her voice steady but filled with an underlying sorrow. "I'm not the one you should be worried about. It's you. It's always been you." William swallowed hard, taking a step closer to her, but the distance between them seemed insurmountable. He didn't know how to fix this. He had always been in control, pulling the strings, orchestrating everything around him. But now he was lost. The lies, the manipulation, the secrets, they were all catching up with him. "I never wanted this to happen," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I had to. I had to keep the life we built. I couldn't lose everything. I couldn't let everything fall apart." Jennifer's heart sank as she listened to his words. They were the same excuses he had used before, but now they sounded hollow, meaningless. There was no longer any power behind them, no convincing reason for why he had lied to her all these years. She had already seen the truth, and now she was ready to hear it all. She needed closure, and she would get it, one way or another. "William," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "tell me the truth. Tell me what you've done. I need to hear it from you." For a long moment, William didn't speak. His eyes darted to the ground as if he were searching for something, some last shred of courage, some reason to keep going with the charade, but it was gone. The lies had been exposed, and there was no way to fix what was already broken. I've been lying," he finally confessed, his voice shaking. "All of it, the businesses, the investments, the money, it was all a lie. I made everything look perfect on the outside, but it was all a facade. And I didn't know how to stop." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the truth. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she processed what he had just admitted. For years she had suspected something was off, but hearing him finally confess was both liberating and crushing at the same time. Her worst fears had been realized. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You lied to me for so long." William's face crumpled with shame. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could control it, but I couldn't. The pressure, the greed, it consumed me. And then when you found out, I panicked. I didn't want to lose everything. I couldn't bear to see it all fall apart." Jennifer shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't get it, do you? It's not about the money, William. It's about the trust. You took that away from me. You destroyed everything we had, everything." He stepped forward again, this time with a pleading look in his eyes. "Jennifer, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me. I'll do anything to make it right. I'll fix it, I swear. Just give me a chance." But Jennifer knew it was too late. The damage had already been done. She couldn't look at him the same way again. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her entire life, was nothing more than a stranger now. "I can't keep living like this," Jennifer said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill over. "I need to get out. I need to start over." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving William standing in the hallway, a man broken by the very lies he had told to keep his world intact. As she walked out the door for the last time, William felt a cold emptiness settle in his chest. The walls he had built were crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. The room was quiet, but her mind was anything but. The truth William had confessed still echoed in her ears, his words sharp, like a knife cutting through her heart. She had never imagined the man she had spent years with could betray her in such a way. And yet, there she was, alone with the choice of how to move forward. The phone in her hand buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her sister Sarah, asking if everything was okay. Jennifer paused, staring at the screen. She hadn't told Sarah the full truth yet. In fact, she hadn't told anyone. Her circle of friends and family had been kept in the dark about the lies that had been growing like a cancer in her marriage. But now, she was standing at the crossroads of a decision that would change everything. She glanced over at the photograph on the nightstand, her wedding day, a smile frozen in time, a moment of happiness now tainted by everything that had come after. Her hand shook as she set the phone down. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The choice she had to make was right in front of her. And this time, it wasn't about saving her marriage. It was about saving herself. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady as she crossed the room. There was a sense of dread creeping up her spine. What if it was William again? What if he was here to plead, to beg her to stay? What could she possibly say to him? She opened the door, and standing on the other side was a stranger, a tall, stern-looking man in a suit. He looked at her with an expression of urgency, and before she could say a word, he stepped inside. "I'm sorry to barge in," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "My name is Daniel Parks. I'm with the police." Jennifer's heart started to race. The word police made her freeze, her blood running cold. Was something wrong? Had something happened to William? The questions flooded her mind, but she struggled to find the words. "Is everything all right?" she managed to ask, her voice shaky. Daniel's eyes softened, but his expression remained grave. "We need to talk. It's about your husband." Jennifer's stomach twisted in knots. She stepped back, allowing him to enter. The last few weeks had been a blur of confusion and betrayal, and now, here was another piece of the puzzle she hadn't expected. What did the police want with William? "Is he in trouble?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel took a deep breath, glancing around the room before meeting her gaze. "It's more complicated than that. We have evidence that suggests your husband might be involved in something much larger than you realize." Jennifer's mind raced. She thought she had heard everything there was to know about William, but now, this was a whole new level of shock. Was William involved in criminal activity? Had all of his lies been part of something bigger, something more dangerous? "What kind of evidence?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. "We've been investigating a series of financial fraud cases, and your husband's name came up in connection with several key players. We believe he's been hiding something that could have serious consequences." Jennifer felt the ground beneath her shift. Her head was spinning. Her instincts told her she couldn't trust William anymore, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Her mind swirled with questions. Was William truly guilty? Had he been lying about everything? And if he was involved in something illegal, what did that mean for her? Was she in danger too? "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely audible, but her eyes locked on Daniel's, desperate for clarity. Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "We need you to help us. You have more access to him than anyone else. If you can get him to talk, to admit his involvement, it could be the key to bringing everything to light." Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a choice between staying or leaving William. This was about her own survival. If she helped the police, she might expose him. But in doing so, she could lose everything. The life she had known, the future she had dreamed of, it would all be gone. But if she didn't help, what would happen to her? What would happen to her family, her friends? She had to make a decision, and it had to be fast. The choice was clear: expose William's secrets, or risk getting caught in a web of lies she might never escape. "Take your time to think about it," Daniel said, sensing the weight of her dilemma. "But understand this, your involvement could change everything. You're at the center of this." Jennifer nodded, her mind reeling. She wasn't just facing a life or death decision for William. She was facing one for herself. The truth had been buried for so long, but now it was out in the open. She couldn't undo what had been done, but could she live with the consequences of her choice? As Daniel turned to leave, Jennifer stood frozen, her eyes staring out the window. The life she had known, the man she had loved, everything was now at stake. Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, her fingers gripping the cold edge as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Her eyes were fixed on the phone in front of her, the screen displaying a message she couldn't ignore. It was from Daniel Parks, the police officer who had shown up unannounced at her door just hours ago. His words echoed in her mind. "You need to decide, Jennifer. Help us or walk away. But if you walk away, we cannot guarantee your safety or anyone else's." The ultimatum was clear. She had to make a choice that would define not only her future, but the futures of everyone involved. What was more dangerous? Helping expose the truth or protecting herself from the consequences of betrayal? What did she owe to William now? Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the twisted reality she was caught in. She could feel the walls closing in on her. She had trusted William, loved him, built a life with him, but now everything she knew about their relationship had been shattered. She wasn't just married to a man who had lied to her. She was tied to someone implicated in a criminal network, someone who had manipulated her into being an unwitting accomplice. The phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was William, his name flashing on the screen. A knot tightened in her stomach. Was he about to beg her to stay? To lie to her again, as he had done for so long? Or did he know the truth was closing in on him? Jennifer hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. If she answered, she risked getting tangled deeper in his web. But if she didn't, she might lose him for good. And with him, any chance of reconciliation. The weight of the decision felt unbearable. It wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about survival. She let the phone ring out, not ready to face him. Instead, she typed a quick reply to Daniel. "I'll meet you tomorrow. I need to think this through." As she hit send, she immediately regretted it. Was she truly ready to take that step? The thought of turning on her husband, the man she had once believed in, made her stomach churn. But the reality was undeniable. She could no longer live in the shadow of his lies. Later that evening, the sound of the front door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Jennifer stood up slowly, her heart racing. She knew it was William. The familiar sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor sent a chill down her spine. He appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of uncertainty. His eyes searched hers as if looking for some sign that everything was still okay between them. But Jennifer couldn't give him that. Not anymore. "Jen," William said softly, his voice full of concern. "What's going on? Why haven't you been answering my calls?" Jennifer took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had to be strong now, for herself and for everyone else involved. This wasn't just about saving her marriage. It was about saving herself from a future full of lies and deceit. "I'm done, William," she said, her voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. "I know what's going on. I know everything." William froze, his expression hardening. "What do you mean? You know everything." His eyes flickered with panic, and for the first time, Jennifer saw the cracks in the facade he had carefully built for years. "I know about the fraud, the money laundering, the people you've been working with," Jennifer continued, her voice unwavering. "The lies you've been telling me. They all add up now." William's face paled, his hands trembling. "Jen, listen," he began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You've had your chance, but I can't keep living this lie with you. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." The room fell silent, and for a moment, Jennifer felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her decision. But as she looked into William's eyes, she knew there was no turning back. She had made up her mind. "I'm meeting with the police tomorrow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to help them." William's face crumpled in disbelief. "You can't. Jennifer, please. You don't know what you're getting into." But Jennifer was resolute. "I know exactly what I'm getting into, William, and this time, I'm choosing me." His eyes narrowed, the anger and fear mixing in a dangerous cocktail. "You'll regret this. You don't know what you're up against." Jennifer's heart skipped a beat, but she stood her ground. "I have to do this. I have no other choice." William took a step back, his face twisting with frustration and rage. He turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Jennifer stood there, breathless, her body trembling from the confrontation. Her decision had been made. There was no turning back now. The next day, Jennifer arrived at the police station, her heart heavy but determined. She had chosen the path of truth, and she would see it through. Whatever the consequences, she couldn't live in the shadows of lies anymore. As she walked into the interrogation room, she knew one thing for sure. This was the final ultimatum, and there would be no going back from it. Jennifer sat in the dimly lit police station, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above her doing little to ease the tension in her chest. It had been a long day filled with questions, pressure, and the weight of her decision hanging over her like a storm cloud. She had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. Daniel Parks, the officer assigned to her case, sat across from her, flipping through the documents that detailed the evidence she had helped uncover. He didn't look up when she entered, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. It was clear this investigation was taking its toll on everyone involved. "You're sure about this, Jennifer?" Daniel's voice was steady, but his eyes held a depth of concern. "This isn't a small thing. The people we're dealing with are dangerous, and they don't take kindly to people betraying them." Jennifer swallowed hard, her mouth dry. The nerves were creeping back, but she pushed them down. "I'm sure," she said, though her voice quivered despite her best efforts to sound confident. "I can't live in this lie anymore. I have to help. I need to know the truth, and I need to make sure William doesn't hurt anyone else." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. All right, we'll take it one step at a time. But you need to understand this isn't just about exposing what William's been doing. This is about your safety too. If this goes wrong. The unspoken danger hung heavily in the air between them. Jennifer's heart raced, but she couldn't let fear control her anymore. Not after everything she'd learned, not after the conversations she had overheard, the whispers of corruption and criminal activity that William had hidden from her. She couldn't let him keep her in the dark, or worse, put her in danger to protect himself. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firmer now, despite the tremor beneath the surface. "What's next?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering her response carefully. He tapped his pen against the table. "We need more. Information, proof, and we need it fast. The people William's been involved with won't stop. If we can hit them where it hurts, we might be able to expose everything." Jennifer's mind raced. She had spent years with William, but now, everything she thought she knew felt like a carefully constructed illusion. Her husband had never been the man she thought. He had never been the person she trusted with her heart, her life. She had been a pawn in a game far larger than she ever imagined. A chill ran down her spine as the thought crossed her mind. What if she wasn't the only one in danger? What if there were others, other women, other families who had unknowingly been swept into his world of lies? And what if William, with all his power and influence, wouldn't let her escape? Her phone buzzed on the table and she flinched, her hand hovering over it. The name on the screen made her stomach churn. William. It had been hours since they last spoke, but seeing his name now, after everything that had transpired, sent a wave of panic through her. What did he want? Was he calling to beg? To threaten? She hesitated. Her mind screamed at her to pick up, to know what he was thinking. But deep down, Jennifer knew she couldn't afford to be distracted. Not now. She pushed the phone aside, silencing it. The stakes were higher than ever. "I can get more information," Jennifer said, her voice shaking with a mix of determination and fear. "I know where he keeps the files. His office. It's all there." Daniel's eyes narrowed, studying her with intensity. "And how do you plan to get into his office without raising suspicion? This is dangerous territory, Jennifer. We need to be smart about this." Jennifer took a deep breath. She had already been down this path, living in his shadow for so long. She knew the layout of his office better than anyone else, and she knew how to get in without him noticing. The only question was whether she could do it without alerting the people who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. "I'll figure it out," she said, determination creeping into her voice. "I have to. I won't let him hurt anyone else." Daniel sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was clearly conflicted, but Jennifer could see the understanding in his eyes. This wasn't just about helping the police anymore. It was about her own redemption, her need to regain control of her life. William had stolen so much from her already. Now she would fight to take it back. "All right," Daniel finally said, standing up from the table. "We'll be with you every step of the way, but Jennifer, you need to be careful. If William finds out, it won't just be your life on the line." The words hit her like a punch in the gut, but she didn't flinch. She had already made her choice. She had to see this through. For her, for the people she loved, and for the truth that had been buried beneath years of lies. As she left the room, the weight of the mission ahead bore down on her. Every step felt like it was pulling her deeper into a web she didn't know how to escape. But one thing was certain. Jennifer was no longer a pawn. She had a mission now, and she was ready to risk everything to finish what she had started. Jennifer stood at the window of her apartment, looking out at the city below. The lights of the streets flickered like 1,000 tiny stars, but they did little to comfort her. Her mind replayed the events of the last few days over and over. It felt like everything she had known, everything she had trusted had been ripped away piece by piece. And now the pieces were scattered around her, leaving nothing but emptiness in their wake. The confrontation with William had been inevitable. After everything, there was no way it could have ended quietly. She had been right to expose him, but the aftermath was something far darker than she had ever expected. There were whispers now, rumors of corruption, bribery, illegal deals, and the worst part? She was caught in the middle, trying to stay ahead of the people who wanted to silence her. Jennifer had expected anger, but the fear that followed was something she hadn't prepared for. William's people had been searching for her. Every day felt like a ticking clock, the hours slipping away as she moved carefully, quietly, trying to keep her head down. She had no idea who she could trust anymore. The friends she thought she had, the allies who had promised to help her, they were gone, either too afraid to get involved or too corrupted to care. Her phone buzzed again, the harsh sound breaking the silence in the room. She picked it up, hesitating for a moment before glancing at the screen. It was Daniel. His name brought a small, fleeting sense of comfort. He had been the only constant, the only person who hadn't abandoned her. But she could feel the weight of the conversation before she even answered. "Jennifer," Daniel's voice was strained, his tone more serious than usual. "We've hit a problem. We've confirmed what you've told us, but it's bigger than we thought, much bigger. The people you've crossed, they're not going to let this go." Jennifer's stomach churned. She had feared this moment, but hearing it out loud made it real. "What do we do now?" Daniel sighed heavily, and she could hear the fatigue in his voice. "We need to act fast, but we need you to be careful. Whoever is behind this is pulling strings. It's not just William anymore, it's a network. They're connected, and they've got resources." Her pulse quickened. The sense of dread she had tried to ignore surged back, threatening to consume her. "I don't know who I can trust anymore, Daniel. I'm alone in this." "You're not alone," he reassured her. But there was a note of hesitation. She knew he wasn't sure either, not anymore. "I've got a few people working with me, but it's getting harder to move without drawing attention." Jennifer's mind raced, trying to piece together her next move. She had exposed the truth, but the cost of doing so was much higher than she had anticipated. What was supposed to be a moment of freedom was now a battle for survival. "I have to go. I can't stay here," she said quickly before the weight of the situation could stop her. "I'll make a move tonight." "Jennifer, don't do anything rash," Daniel warned, but his voice sounded distant now, like he was already bracing for something to go wrong. "There are too many risks. You don't know who's watching." The words hung in the air, suffocating. Jennifer's mind was made up, though. She couldn't stay in hiding forever. She couldn't let them win. The lies had to be exposed, and if she had to risk everything to make that happen, she would. "I don't have a choice," she said quietly, before hanging up. She stared at her phone for a moment, the reality of what she was about to do settling in. She wasn't sure if she was being brave or foolish. There was a thin line between hero and victim, and she wasn't sure where she stood anymore. But she had crossed that line already, hadn't she? She had exposed William, betrayed his secrets to the world. Now there was no going back. It wasn't just about bringing down a corrupt man anymore. It was about taking down an entire network, one that had gone unchecked for years. She didn't know how deep it went, or how far she would have to go to make it stop. But she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't do it alone. Jennifer moved quickly, gathering what little she had left in her apartment. A few clothes, some cash, her phone. It wasn't much, but it was all she had left. She couldn't stay here, not with the people William had in his pocket. She needed to disappear, to make herself invisible long enough to get the evidence she needed. The city outside felt distant now, the lights a mere blur behind her as she grabbed her bag and stepped into the night. She didn't know what was waiting for her, but she had made her choice. She couldn't undo what had been done, but she could fight, and fight she would until the very end. The city was colder than she remembered. Jennifer walked through the crowded streets, her eyes scanning every corner, every face, always looking over her shoulder. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her, that the shadow of danger was never far away. Every step she took felt like a countdown to something she couldn't control, a reality she was trying to outrun, but never quite managing to escape. For days now, she had been moving in secret, jumping from one hiding spot to the next, relying on people she wasn't sure she could trust. But there was no turning back. The evidence she had collected, the documents, the recordings, the photographs, was enough to bring down the entire empire that had been operating in the shadows for so long. She had uncovered the truth. The question was, would anyone believe her? It had been a week since her phone call with Daniel, and every day felt like an eternity. There had been no word from him, no sign that anyone was actually trying to help. The weight of isolation had grown heavier with each passing day. The worst part was that Jennifer didn't even know who to turn to anymore. William's reach was vast. It extended into every corner of the city, and even the most trusted allies were looking over their shoulders, afraid of being dragged into the mess she had started. She needed to expose everything. The world had to know what William had been hiding. But the more she thought about it, the more the reality of what she was up against hit her. This wasn't just about a corrupt businessman, or even a politician with dirty hands. It was much bigger. There were powerful people involved, people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Jennifer's phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old warehouse near 5th and Main. I have something for you. Don't trust anyone else." Her pulse quickened. There was no time to think. The message could be a trap, but it could also be her one shot at getting the truth out. She had no other choice. She made her way to the location, every step filled with a mixture of dread and determination. The streets grew quieter as she approached the outskirts of the city, and the warehouse loomed in the distance, abandoned and forgotten, just like the secrets it likely held inside. Jennifer's heart raced as she entered the building. It was dark and damp, the faint smell of mildew and decay in the air. She moved cautiously, her senses alert, eyes darting around every shadow. The only sound was the echo of her own footsteps, the heavy silence pressing down on her. And then, she saw him. Daniel. He was standing in the center of the room, his figure barely visible in the low light. The relief she felt upon seeing him was immediately tempered by the look on his face. Tense, guarded. There was something different about him, something off. "Jennifer," he said quietly, his voice strained, "you shouldn't have come here." She stopped, searching his eyes for some sign of reassurance, but all she saw was hesitation. "What's going on, Daniel? Why are you acting like this?" Daniel sighed, his gaze flicking to the ground. "I wanted to help you, Jennifer, but there's more to this than you realize. I'm not the only one who's been watching." Her mind raced. "What do you mean? What are you not telling me?" "I'm trying to protect you," he said, his voice breaking. "The people you've exposed, they're not just after you, they're after everyone who's been involved. And I've been compromised. I can't help you anymore." Jennifer's world seemed to collapse around her. The air felt thick, suffocating. The one person she had trusted, the only person who had seemed like an ally, was now telling her that she was alone. She felt betrayed, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had come this far. She wasn't backing down now. "What's the plan then, Daniel?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "How do we get the truth out?" Daniel's expression softened, but it was clear that whatever he had planned, it was a long shot. "There's a broadcast scheduled tomorrow," he said slowly. "The evidence you've gathered, it's enough to expose everything. But we'll need a way to get it to the public without it getting buried." Jennifer nodded, already formulating a plan in her head. She wasn't going to let this die. The truth was too important. Too many lives had been ruined, and she couldn't stand by and watch it all go to waste. But as they spoke, a faint sound interrupted their conversation, a creaking noise from above. Jennifer froze, her eyes widening. Daniel's face went pale, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. And then it hit her. They were not alone. The people she had been running from were already here. Daniel's warning came too late. "Run!" But it was already too late. Shadows moved swiftly, closing in on them from every side. The truth was finally within her grasp, but whether she would live to see it revealed was another story entirely. The echo of their footsteps was drowned out by the rapid thumping of Jennifer's heart. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, to break away from Daniel and sprint toward safety, but the looming shadows didn't give her that luxury. The trap was set, and they were already closing in. The faint creak from the ceiling above had been a warning, a signal that they weren't alone, but now it was too late to turn back. Daniel shoved Jennifer toward the only exit they had left. "Move now!" She didn't hesitate. Sprinting ahead, Jennifer's mind raced faster than her feet could carry her. The evidence, the carefully gathered files, the recordings, the photographs that had taken her months to collect, was the only thing that could expose the entire operation. If she lost it now, everything would have been in vain. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of feet scuffing against the concrete floor, but it wasn't enough to stop her. She couldn't afford to look back. She had come too far, and now, she wasn't just running for herself, she was running for every single person who had ever been hurt by the system. But Daniel wasn't far behind, his hand still on his gun, checking their surroundings as they moved through the dark warehouse. His face was taut, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, knowing just as well as she did that no one could be trusted in this game, not even him. "Keep running," Daniel urged, his voice tight with fear. Jennifer's chest was tight, every breath sharp and shallow. They were too close. Her fingers gripped the stack of documents she carried, the weight of them more oppressive than ever. It was the only leverage she had left. They pushed forward into the next room, the air thick with dust, but the space seemed to pulse with danger. The silence was broken by the sudden screech of a door being forced open. Jennifer stopped dead in her tracks. A group of men stood in the doorway, blocking their escape. Men who had once been faceless, nameless in her mind. Now they had faces, the very faces of the people who had orchestrated this twisted game. William's people. A tall figure stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculated. Jennifer recognized him instantly. Jason, a man who had been one of the first to betray her trust. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. "I knew you wouldn't let it go," Jason sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "But you're too late. The evidence is already ours." Jennifer's mind scrambled for a way out, but there was no escape. The weight of everything she had fought for, all the sacrifices, everything she had worked to uncover, it seemed to crumble before her. "You can't hide the truth forever," she snapped, trying to keep her voice steady. "People will find out." Jason chuckled, his gaze flicking to his colleagues, then back to her. "You think this is the truth? This is just a small part of the picture, Jennifer. You've been too busy chasing shadows to see the whole thing." She felt a rush of panic rise in her chest, but she couldn't let it show. The thought of losing everything now was too much to bear. "Then show me," she said, her voice laced with defiance. "Show me how much of a lie everything I've found really is." Jason stepped closer, his grin widening. "You don't get it, do you? The moment you started digging, you became part of something much bigger than you ever realized. We control everything, the media, the public perception, even the truth itself. You're just a pawn in our game." A chill ran down her spine. This was more than she had bargained for. William's empire wasn't just built on money and power. It was built on lies, and those lies had stretched into every corner of society, infecting everything she thought she understood. Jennifer's mind raced. There had to be a way out. If the evidence was already in their hands, there was only one thing she could do. She had to make sure it got out. She had to find a way to get the truth to the people who would believe in it, who would spread it, no matter how much they tried to bury it. "Don't you get it?" she said, her voice steely. "You may have the power now, but people like me, we never stop. We fight." Jason raised an eyebrow, the challenge in her words sparking a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. He didn't respond right away, and for a moment, Jennifer thought she saw a hint of hesitation in his face. Before she could react, Daniel lunged at Jason, knocking him off balance. "Go!" he yelled, his voice a roar. "I'll hold them off." Jennifer's pulse spiked as the chaos erupted around her. She stumbled back, clutching the evidence tighter. The fight was only beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. She had to get out. The truth had to come out. She ran, pushing past the panic, focusing only on the evidence that could break the chain of lies that had held everyone in this city captive. The chase was far from over. The danger was real, but the fight for justice had just begun. With each step she took, the truth grew heavier in her hands. But with it, she carried the hope that one day it would be enough to bring everything into the light. The courtroom was a battleground, tension thick in the air as Jennifer stood at the center of it all. Every inch of her being was focused on the matter at hand, bringing the truth to light, no matter the cost. She glanced toward the prosecutor's table, where William's legal team sat, their faces composed, but their eyes sharp with calculation. The odds were against her, but Jennifer refused to be intimidated. She had come this far. Across the aisle, Daniel stood beside her, his gaze steady. The files in her hands, critical evidence, were the only thing standing between William's empire and justice. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. This was it, the final chance. There was no room for hesitation. She had been through too much, and now she had to make it count. Her lawyer, Ethan, leaned in, his voice a whisper. "This is it, Jennifer. Just stay calm. We have the evidence. They can't dismiss it. The jury needs to see the truth." Jennifer nodded, though inside her nerves threatened to consume her. She had seen the way the defense had tried to spin everything, the lies they had tried to bury her under, but she was ready. She had to be. The trial had been going on for weeks, each day unraveling more of the tangled web William had spun. Every witness, every document, every scrap of information had been carefully laid out, piece by piece, exposing the corruption that had festered for far too long. And now it all came down to this, the final showdown. The judge banged his gavel, bringing the room to silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this is your final opportunity to deliberate on the evidence presented. You will decide the fate of the accused. Jennifer's heart raced as she watched the defense attorney stand, his polished demeanor never faltering. He was smooth, too smooth. His voice was steady as he addressed the jury, attempting to discredit everything they had worked for. "Ladies and gentlemen," the defense attorney began, his tone measured but insidious, "the prosecution would have you believe that these accusations are founded on solid evidence, but I ask you to consider one thing: the truth. What is truth in a world filled with lies? What is evidence when it is manipulated and taken out of context? You must look beyond the dramatized narratives and focus on what truly matters." Jennifer felt a wave of anger ripple through her, but she forced herself to remain composed. She knew what was at stake. She had already come so far. She couldn't afford to let the defense's words sway the jury. The truth had to prevail. Her lawyer, Ethan, rose to his feet next, his presence commanding as he walked toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong but measured, "the truth is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of fact, and the facts are irrefutable. What you have seen over the past few weeks is not a narrative designed to confuse you. It is the reality that we are facing." Jennifer could feel the weight of every word Ethan spoke, his conviction matching hers. "The evidence you have seen, the testimonies you have heard, are not mere coincidences. They are the truth, pieces of a puzzle that have been painstakingly put together. And they lead to one undeniable conclusion. William has been at the helm of a criminal operation, exploiting every opportunity for personal gain, while leaving devastation in his wake." Jennifer couldn't tear her eyes away from the defense team. William's face was stoic, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something close to desperation. It was the first time she had seen him break his perfect facade. Ethan continued, his voice unwavering. "The truth is here, right in front of you, and it's up to you, the jury, to decide whether you will allow this corruption to continue or whether you will stand for what's right." The room fell into silence as the jury deliberated. Jennifer's thoughts spun, her mind racing with all the evidence, all the sacrifices, all the pain that had led to this moment. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her a silent nod of encouragement. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to her. She had to believe that it would be enough. Minutes stretched into hours as the jury reviewed the evidence, the tension unbearable. Jennifer's fingers clenched around the stack of documents, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment that could change everything. If they lost this, if the jury didn't believe in the truth, then everything she had fought for would have been in vain. Finally, the door to the jury room opened. The foreman stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "We have reached a verdict," he said, his voice steady. The room fell completely still. Jennifer's breath hitched. Every pair of eyes was on the jury as they prepared to announce the decision that would determine the course of her life and the lives of so many others. The judge nodded for the foreman to speak. "We, the jury, find the defendant, William, guilty on all counts." A wave of disbelief followed by relief flooded through Jennifer. The truth had prevailed. The weight she had been carrying, the fear that had gnawed at her for so long, was lifted in an instant. William, the man who had built his empire on lies, was going to pay for his crimes. Jennifer's legs felt weak as the reality of the moment set in. The victory wasn't just hers. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been crushed by the weight of injustice. She had fought for them, and now, finally, the truth had won. The courtroom felt unnaturally still. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed muted, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. Jennifer stood at the edge of the defendant's table, her hands trembling despite the calm exterior she tried to maintain. The jury had deliberated for hours, the weight of the decision looming over them, and now the moment had finally arrived. Her heart pounded in her chest, but Jennifer forced herself to focus. She had done everything she could. Every piece of evidence, every argument had been carefully laid out to expose the truth. She had placed her trust in the jury. Now it was up to them to decide the fate of William, and in many ways the fate of everything she had fought for. Behind her, she could hear the shuffle of feet as the court's attention shifted toward the entrance of the jury foreman. The room quieted in unison, all eyes drawn to him. Jennifer's breath hitched as she braced herself for what came next. The judge nodded at the foreman, signaling for him to speak. "We, the jury, have reached a verdict." The foreman's voice was steady, though there was a trace of fatigue in it. It was no surprise. The deliberation had been long and intense. Jennifer could feel her pulse quicken as the final moment drew closer. Her eyes flickered toward William. He sat motionless, his face betraying nothing, a mask of indifference that he had worn throughout the trial. Though Jennifer could feel the tension radiating from him, she knew deep down that the world was shifting under his feet. Whatever the outcome, this was the beginning of the end for him. "Will the defendant please rise?" The judge's voice broke through the silence. Jennifer watched as William slowly stood, his movements deliberate. The room seemed to grow even quieter as everyone waited, their collective breath held. The foreman continued, "We, the jury, find the defendant, William, guilty of all charges." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jennifer's mind swirled with disbelief and relief, as if the weight of years of struggle had just been lifted from her shoulders. William's face remained impassive, but Jennifer could see the subtle twitch of his jaw. The reality of the verdict was sinking in, and there was no denying it now. The judge's voice was calm, but firm. "You have been found guilty of the charges brought against you. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. You are remanded into custody until then." Jennifer's knees felt weak beneath her, and she steadied herself against the table. It was over. William's empire, built on lies and deceit, was crumbling before her eyes. The truth had prevailed. Justice had been served. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of the crowd as the verdict sank in. She didn't turn around, not yet. She couldn't afford to be distracted now. She had fought so long, had endured so much to reach this moment. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every single person who had been affected by William's crimes, the ones who had been silenced, the ones whose lives had been ruined. This victory was for them. Jennifer's eyes flickered to Daniel, who stood near the back of the courtroom. He met her gaze, his expression filled with silent pride and understanding. They had both been through so much together. They had fought side by side, and now they could finally begin to heal. The battle had been long, but the war was over. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Jennifer allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The world outside the doors still seemed distant, foreign even. She had spent so long in this battle, consumed by it, that the thought of what lay ahead was almost overwhelming. What would life look like now? What would the future hold after so much destruction? But in that moment, as the sound of footsteps faded into the distance, Jennifer realized that she no longer had to carry the weight alone. She had fought for the truth, and the truth had won. Whatever came next, she could face it with strength and clarity. As the final gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, Jennifer allowed herself to breathe deeply. She had done it, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the freedom that only truth and justice could bring. The walls of William's once imposing corporate headquarters felt cold and indifferent now. Jennifer stood at the threshold, her gaze sweeping over the vast space that had once been the heart of his empire. The polished marble floors, the sleek glass walls, the extravagant offices, it all seemed so hollow in the wake of the trial, in the wake of the truth. The empire William had spent years constructing, built on manipulation, corruption, and lies, was crumbling before her eyes. It had only been a few days since the verdict, yet already the ripple effects were undeniable. The media had pounced, relentless in its pursuit of every detail, every piece of scandalous information. News outlets broadcasted every aspect of the trial, and the public was finally awakening to the extent of William's crimes. What had once been an indomitable force in the business world was now a sinking ship, and the people who had once been loyal to him were scattering like rats from a burning building. Jennifer's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Daniel. "We've got confirmation. The investigation into his other companies has started. They're digging into every transaction, every deal. His empire is already beginning to fall apart." She allowed herself a small smile. She hadn't been sure what would happen in the aftermath of the trial, but this was beyond what she had hoped for. William's web of deceit was unraveling piece by piece. The money laundering, the fraudulent contracts, the backroom deals, it was all coming to light, and there was nowhere for him to hide anymore. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Daniel approaching, his face marked with exhaustion but also a sense of quiet victory. He had been by her side through every step of this journey, and now, together, they were witnessing the fallout. "You're right," Daniel said, reading the expression on her face. "This is bigger than we thought. The entire network is collapsing. They've already started freezing his assets. His connections are scrambling to distance themselves from him. Jennifer nodded, her mind racing. The destruction of William's empire was just the beginning. There would be legal battles, investigations, and perhaps even more revelations to come. But for now, she allowed herself to savor this moment, the culmination of years of work. They had exposed the truth, and in doing so, had set the wheels of justice in motion. William, on the other hand, was not faring so well. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced with a palpable sense of desperation. Jennifer had heard that he had already been moved to a high-security facility awaiting sentencing. His name, once synonymous with success and power, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. The thought of his downfall brought a sense of grim satisfaction, but Jennifer knew that his fall wasn't just about him. It was about everyone he had trampled on, everyone whose lives he had ruined in his pursuit of wealth and control. It was about the families he had destroyed, the victims who had been silenced, and the countless lives that had been altered because of his choices. This victory was for them. Jennifer's gaze shifted back to the vast, empty office. She could almost hear the echoes of William's arrogant laughter, the sound of his calls to his associates, the promises he had made to those who served him. It was all gone now. The empire had crumbled, and it had crumbled because of one thing: the truth. She could feel the weight of her own journey in her bones, the countless sleepless nights, the personal sacrifices, the struggles, and the setbacks. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. "Do you think it's over?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension to it, as if he knew that this moment, this victory, was only the beginning. Jennifer looked at him, her expression serious. "It's far from over. This is just the first chapter. The truth is out, but there are still many who will try to bury it. We've got to make sure we stay vigilant." Daniel nodded in agreement. "We will, and we'll make sure it stays out in the open. This empire may have fallen, but the fight is far from over." Jennifer turned away from the office, stepping toward the elevator. It was time to leave this place behind. She had won, but she knew that the battle for justice wasn't a single victory. It was a fight that would continue, for as long as there was darkness to uncover and lies to expose, and Jennifer was prepared for whatever came next. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The empire had fallen, but the fight for the truth would never end. What do you think of William Bradford's actions? Was it pure greed, or was there something deeper driving him to murder? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more shocking true crime stories. Stay tuned and stay curious.